Welcome to How to Live Slow, the podcast where we discuss slow living for the modern woman and help you design an intentionally slower family life. I'm Rachelle Glendon, your personal slow living coach and host of this podcast. I know all about busy, but I love living slow. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of How to Live Slow. I hope, as always, that you are doing really well, and thanks for joining me. So today we're going to be talking about generosity and what does that even mean and how can we be generous when we've got nothing much to give. But before we do, I want to quickly let you know about my new coaching offer. So recently I've started coaching with some clients in a 1-month container, which is a weekly call for 4 weeks. And it is so great if you want a really deep, immersive experience to really figure out what exactly it is that you're not seeing about your life that's creating the busyness. Or maybe you do know what it is, but you're not really sure what to do about it. This container, this 1-month container, is really perfect for that. And what I'm finding though is that then that change can happen really quickly. We can really dive into that. But then what happens is you might want to continue. And some people actually don't even need or want or have the capacity to go so deeply for such an intensive amount of time. And so it would be remiss of me not to let you know that I'm now offering a fortnightly coaching offer. So it's ongoing and you pay by the month. It's $250 a month and you get 2 calls a month. So fortnightly calls. You can cancel anytime, but I recommend doing at least 6 sessions because that's when you start to get the biggest benefit. If you have resonated with my work and you want to talk about like midlife transitions, matrescence, slow living, or how to navigate change in your life or to figure out what decision or which path to take, all of the things that you've heard me talk about, then coaching with me might be something you'd like to consider. And if that is you, then I'll leave a link in the show notes for you to access that. I've got maybe 3 or 4 spots left for next term for that sort of ongoing coaching offer. And of course, I'm always available if you have any other questions or want to chat a little bit before you commit to something like that. Just let me know and we can hop on a quick chat on Zoom just to sort of explore your options. That would be amazing. So let's get on with the main part of the show. So when I first became a mother, it felt like my capacity to think about or do anything other than mothering kind of drained away. I forgot how to have conversations. I realized I could answer questions, but I actually couldn't think of anything to ask. I saw people, but I couldn't remember how to be with them. I knew the world was happening outside of my bubble, but I forgot how to show I cared. I wasn't depressed, I was depleted, which is a concept I learnt from Amy Taylor Kabaz during my matrescence training with her and some of the resources that she recommended. I loved the early years with my babies and I still find myself really mourning the passing of that sweet time. It was such a blessing to have that. Something that stands out from that time, I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't even really know that I needed help or what kind of help would have been most valuable. I felt guilty that I just wasn't able to be there for others either. It seemed to me that I would just always be in a kind of survival mode limbo. And I dreamed of one day having more capacity for things that other than motherhood again. So this year, instead of choosing a theme word for the year like I would normally do, I decided to choose a concept to explore. I've got more time on my hands now because both the kids are at school. So I decided to explore the concept of generosity. I wanted to work through all of the aspects of this word. So what does it mean to be generous? Where is the line between generosity and a lack of boundaries? What does it take to receive generosity? Who gets to be generous? How I can be more generous than it feels comfortable? What even is generosity really? How does it apply to your business, your relationships, or yourself? And what else does it relate to and impact? I just really feel that there is so much to learn and explore about this word, and it's a precursor for a lot of things. So to get started, let's answer a quick question. How do you be generous when you have nothing left to give? It's a tricky one, and I think the short answer is you don't. There is actually generosity in receiving. Part of generosity is allowing others to be helpful to you. At certain times in your life, you might have to learn how to receive support, and early motherhood is one of those, which is actually complicated for me because I have PTSD, and part of that is a tendency to be hyper independent. So you can see where the consequences of that would lead me. Nonetheless, allowing others to be generous with you is generosity reciprocated. So I think the longer answer is that I think we need to look at what generosity actually is. So I want to ask you, what do you think generosity means? So I think it means different things to different people. But here's what I've learned about generosity so far. I've been doing a lot of thought work around this idea, and here's what I've landed on. In our culture of individualism, we've come to unconsciously interpret that to be generous means we have to give away or share our money as if it's the only or the highest resource we have. And I think that just shows how far gone we are as a society. Generosity under capitalism has become a monoculture. We think of resources as cash and assets. And I think it serves us to expand this view of generosity. Let's think about what our resources actually are, because it's not just money. Our resources can also include our time, our attention, our presence, our knowledge, our energy, our space and shelter. So our homes can be a place of generosity, our food, our connections and contacts, our cultural wisdom, our privilege, and even our common lands, which I learned about this concept of common lands in an episode of the Upstream podcast where they talked about, I think there's a book called Less is More by Jason Hickel. And in that episode of Upstream, they had him on the podcast, and I read his book, and he talks about the enclosure of common land, which was all the public spaces that we use to grow food and to come together, our community squares and things like that. Now we just have shopping centres, really. And a lot of places, like really libraries, are one of the only places that are left that are kind of free to use as a common space. I mean, that's very top level, but you can kind of see how if we had common land to share, that would be a form of generosity. But yeah, we can share all of those resources and we can give generously of them when we can. And it will often not cost us much in terms of money. Thinking of generosity in this way shows me that we have a lot more to give than you first might think. And here's what else I think generosity is. Also, trusting that we have enough. It's also gratitude for having people to share with. Generosity is also a mindset for how we think and act. And it's also love. But also, generosity is how we sustain each other. My ability to be generous is directly linked to my ability to have boundaries. It's not about being selfless, but in being sure of who you are and what you have to give. So here's another thought. Generosity is at the heart of the village life we all crave. So we've created a society where we have to, above all things, focus on creating financial abundance to be safe. But we collectively benefit from people having a wide range of skills. Our artists, our writers, scientists, creatives, deep thinkers, carers, nurturers, healers, inventors and makers of all kinds have all had to figure out one thing, and that is how to monetize. And I believe our society is poorer for it. Like, some vocations are not meant to be about how much you earn. They're meant to be in service to others. Like our politicians, clergy, creatives, and all of the people that I mentioned above, all of those kind of careers. They were historically not about money, but about the calling to be of service. And in return, the rest of our society was, we collectively take care of each other. That's how we create that village feel. So that's something else to explore, really, is this concept of the village, and how do we create a village when we all desperately, particularly mothers, desperately want a village, but it's just hard to come by, hard to create. We can't really create a village of one. And then I think there's this idea of the theory of infinite pies. I've noticed that there are two ways of thinking about life when it comes to being generous. One is that we assume there's only one pie and we all have to share it, which is where jealousy and greed and hoarding come into play. It's where capitalism kind of lives. And the other is when we assume that each of us has our own pie. So we get to share our pies between each other. Everybody has a different flavour pie. And we do need to account for the impact of social inequity here. Everybody has a different size pie, and that is unfair. I can't allow myself to stay in this thought for too long, though. I can't sit in the guilt of having a bigger pie than others, because that does nothing for my ability to be of service or to help change the way pies are made. So I feel like being generous with my pie is working to change the way pies are made. You can see where this analogy is going, right? So I've decided that there is this idea that you can be in the system and participate blindly in the system, and people who don't feel comfortable with that, and I'm talking about our social system, people who don't feel comfortable with that tend to exit the system. And you can exit the system and become a recluse and go live in the forest and, go off grid. But there is a third way, and that third way involves us accepting that the system is what it is, and how can we live, work, and love, be generous within that, and create change from the inside out. Recognize that the system has faults and figure out ways of managing that. So this is how I'm being generous now. One of my goals with my business is to be generous with my clients. I'm exploring what that looks like, but so far it's things like sending them gifts, giving them additional resources, and keeping my prices lower. But I don't also want to make sure that I'm not bombarding them with too much. So some of my generosity requires me to step back and allow them to have their process and being available about, when they need me, kind of thing. I'm being generous with myself, which means giving myself time to be creative and practicing deep self-kindness, which is such an important first step for so many things. I'm being generous with my thoughts about others and their intentions, which is really actually good for my own mind too, because it means I'm making less assumptions and having more direct conversations. I'm being generous with my attention. So I'm giving more than likes and hearts to content creators that I love. I leave them comments, I share their work, or I subscribe. I'm making myself available for my children when they need me. So I'm learning the art of being present and listening. And I'm also turning my attention to my friends when it comes to that. I'm listening to them when they need to talk. So that's the few ways that I'm, approaching being generous now. And a final thought. Like many things, it seems that generosity lives on a cycle. There's a time for giving and a time for receiving. You can't have everybody being generous in the giving. You have to have people to receive that generosity. There's a time for going inward to recoup what you've given, and a time to harvest rewards. I think it's also a spectrum, as we all have different types and amounts of resources. Think of the theory of pies. And here's a bit of a kicker. Those of us who have less money seem to give more time. And I actually wonder which causes the other. As in, when someone gives more time, is that because they have less money to give, or do they give more time because they have less money? Or do they have less money because they're giving more time? So which one causes the other? If you're feeling depleted or lost or lonely and it feels like you have nothing much to give, try starting with a smile or a friendly hello, and notice that the smile you get back gives you so much more energy, and it has a ripple effect on your life. That's where I started, and then I moved on to saying hello. You just never really know what you can create with those simple beginning gestures of generosity. That's how we create our village, even in places where it feels like there isn't one, and that is how we change our lives. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. You might have been able to tell that I actually was kind of reading, because here's why. I have started a Substack. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. You might have heard of Substack before, or you might not have. It is a platform. You can download the app or you can read it online, but it's a platform that's kind of like a collective blog. So I have my kind of written content on there. I can also record my podcast. So this audio will be on there. There is a subscriber chat, so you can hop on there and talk to me directly. So there's and have a community chat so we can all talk together about the different topics. And in future, there are paid options. So if you want, I'm thinking about running my seasons of slow through the paid option of Substack. Now, the important reason why I've decided to start creating content on Substack, there's two. The first reason is my purely personal goal of wanting to become a better, more prolific writer. I feel like being a writer is a new identity that I want to step into, and I've got my long-term goal to write a book. So this is a first step. The second one is that I'm a slow living advocate, and I can tell you I love social media, but it's harming our attention. And Substack is a bit of an answer to that. I have a lot to say on particular topics, and it's hard to write a really in-depth overview of a topic, or in-depth, not overview, an in-depth, blog or content piece on a topic on an Instagram caption. It's also really hard to do that within a reel or any of the other kind of short form content that happens on social media. So for me, Substack is part of the answer to that. So I'll still be on social media because I want to find my crew, right? That's, I think, the best way for me to find people. But I'm hoping that most of the people who are interested in my content will move across to subscribe on Substack. I want us all to have better attention, and I think longer form content is one step of how to develop and regain our attention and our capacity for having bigger, nuanced conversations around topics. So that's part of the reason why I'm moving across to Substack. I would love you to come over there, and I'm really excited because it does feel like the new way of doing that old school. Do you remember when we all used to love reading blogs, and you could hop on and leave a comment and the writer of the blog would write back, and, back in the 2000s, I really miss those days. So this is kind of an answer to that. So there's, it's kind of like part blog, part newsletter, and part members only community. So I hope you'll come across there. I'll leave the links to that and my coaching offers in the show notes as well. I really look forward to seeing you next time for my 100th podcast episode, which I cannot believe is coming up. Okay, so that is it from me. I hope you're really well. I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode, and take care until next time. Bye for now. That's it for another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to connect further, the show notes from today's episode, including all the social links and free resources, are over on my website, howtoliveslow.com/podcast. Have a beautiful week ahead, and I'll speak with you again soon.